Okay, so again, good day everyone. So this is the second to the last session of HA 207, and today we will discuss two powerful frameworks. So the epidemiology of emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases and the One Health approach. Will be grounding everything in the Philippine context because the diseases we're talking about are not abstract. They're happening here. They have names and they have numbers. So, and some of you have experienced it, no, in the hospital. By the end of this day, it's very important to know what One Health is, but being able to use it and analyzing a real scenario, identify again the interfaces. Remember the host, agent, organism interaction, and propose a coordinated response. So, in terms of details, we'll look into these learning objectives. First is to define and classify. So you should be able to distinguish what is emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases using the epidemiological criteria and some examples in our local setting. We have to analyze certain drivers because diseases don't emerge spontaneously or randomly. There are ecological, social, and environmental factors that we need to look into, and some of which are very specific in our country. Third is interpret data. So we have a previous lecture on analyzing epidemiological curves. At this time, this would be an application of that theoretical concept. We have to look also the spot and attack rate maps and disease surveillance reports from the H Philippines. So this is based on our previous sessions during last week. And then we'll look into the One Health framework in analyzing complex health threats that involve the interaction between human, animal, and the environment, and what will be our response, no, to a particular health scenario. Propose evidence-based multi-sectoral interventions using the One Health approach. So now let's look into first the emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases. So again, no, I think we have discussed it partly in one of our previous sessions, the difference between emerging and re-emerging. Emerging infectious diseases are those that have newly appeared in a population, or it might have existed before, but um, it's either rapidly increasing, either in incidence, geographic range, or host range. COVID-19 is the most recent example in which it was a novel coronavirus with no prior immunity in the humans, and it spread globally within a few weeks. Re-emerging is different. We have known these diseases. We have at least a basic understanding of the pathogenicity of these organisms. They have declined in terms of incidence and cases, but they are now coming back. Why? Often it's could be antimicrobial resistance. Sometimes it's vaccine hesitancy, or sometimes it's due to the changes in the environment and also in terms of the social changes. So, um, therefore, we can say that while the disease was really never was eliminated, it was just suppressed or limited. So let's look at some examples, no, of emerging and re-emerging. So as I mentioned, COVID-19, and then almost overlap, no, during the second year of the pandemic, there was also the scare in the monkeypox. So it is also an emerging type of infectious disease. There were confirmed cases, no, but there was a quicker response, no, because of the interagency task force, which was really active during that time, but which was primarily due to COVID-19. So I think that helped also because we're, we have learned lessons during the pandemic. There are already protocols that were set for surveillance and control of this infection. So the impact of the monkeypox in our country was limited. And then there's the re-emerging diseases such as dengue, which has Some would say still have epidemic cycles, but again, I would say even in summer seasons, there are still cases. They might decline, but some would say there's still the difference is not very significant compared to the rainy months. And then rabies still endemic, so there's still about 200 to 300 deaths per year, and 99% of course would be from dog bites or animal bites. Um, Again, the problem with rabies, of course, it has a high case fatality rate. It is There's no treatment if there's already a full-blown infection. So the best thing to do is do the vaccinations, no? The rabies vaccines, and some supportive management like wound care. Finally, typhoid and enteric fever, they are partly re-emerging. Um, and we can also mention yung other even pneumonia because of the multi-drug resistant strains that are already detected, no, in our country. So the bottom line is the classification would shape our response in terms of surveillance strategy, vaccine policy, international reporting obligations, uh, and it also trickles down to the hospital settings because again, yung staffing, procurement of the needed equipment, materials would come into play, no, if there is an increase of cases of either emerging or re-emerging infectious diseases. So, why do diseases emerge or re-emerge? So, let's look into these 6 drivers that are relevant in our country. So, one would be deforestation and land use. Our country has lost, in estimate, 90% of our primary forest. Um, while it's an environmental statistic, it uh, it also brings out a negative impact in terms of health. It is a disease risk factor. So the problem is when forests are cleared, the animals that live there move into the human inhabited spaces, and sometimes we also quote unquote occupy, their natural habitats as well. So example would be the deforestation in Palawan, no, which led to the Nipah-like bat human interfaces. Um, so it led to yung certain infectious diseases that are related to bats. Second is rapid urbanization. There's an Metro Manila is one of the densest in terms of population worldwide. So 71,000 people per square kilometer. So imagine that. Nakasiksik lang sila in 1 square kilometer. And then a large portion of those in Metro Manila live in informal settlements. They're also the locations are flood prone. So when typhoon hits and flooding occurs, you have the perfect conditions for, like for example, leptospirosis and dengue cases. Third is the global travel and trade. So yeah, because of the increase in not just in air travel, no, but also in even yung shipping. But remember, COVID-19 and the MPAX entered the Philippines through the international arrivals. And then poultry trade routes also has been implicated in the bird flu outbreak, which happened a few years back. So if we cannot even, because of the very unique archipelagic nature of our country, our borders are very porous and with limited security guarding our boundaries. We are porous to the entry of different pathogens, no? Either through by sea and by air. Fifth would be yung climate change and El Nino. So some are estimating that there's another El Nino cycle that's upcoming in the few months. But more than that, because of climate change, there is an increase in terms of the frequency and the intensity of these typhoons and flooding, which leads to increase in dengue and leptospirosis cases. Um, so because of these changes, no, in the environment, um, it is a disease driver. And uh, hopefully, we can do some measures in order to mitigate, no, this climate change. And then finally, the vaccine hesitancy. So let's, I think the one that amplified further the vaccine hesitancy. Remember, even before the pandemic, even way before 2010s, the coverage of certain vaccine preventable diseases is dismal if we will compare it even to other Asian countries. But however, no, because of the Dembaksha controversy, more than a decade ago, so it damaged yung public trust, no, and um, in terms of how we immunize um, yung immunization programs of the Department of Health, which I think is valid because I think the implementation of the Dimbaksha rollout was accelerated, no, without taking into consideration yung standard protocols, um, having the patients to to slow down the rollout process, and also even the the administration of consent, no, through the parents is even questionable. So what happened? Because of that, within 1 year after the controversy, vaccination rates dropped by 40%. So what happened? Even before the pandemic, an infectious disease challenge happened in our country. The measles outbreak, uh, which documented more than 47,000 cases and accounted for 630 deaths, which is the largest outbreak in decades. And primarily driven by eroded vaccine confidence. So the problem is, when you lose trust, in a particular aspect, it takes years to rebuild. It that trust uh, doesn't return overnight. So let's look at key data points, no, in terms of disease burden. Now, this is based on the epidemiology bureau numbers by the Department of Health. So the cases, no, that are collected through the surveillance that we give. Uh, so, so these are some of these numbers are not recent, no. So like for example, the dengue cases, it peaked in 2019, about 422,000 cases. And then, as I mentioned, the outbreak of 47,000 cases. And then during the pandemic, a cumulative cases of 4.1 million Filipinos and around 300 rabies deaths per year. And then let's look at the notable outbreaks. So 2003, I was still a student at that time. So there were 3 cases of SARS, and luckily it was contained rapidly. And then in 2009, the H1N1 influenza that resulted in 300 deaths and a national emergency declaration. Then on 2012, the had foot and mouth disease in the National Capital Region. Again, the Dembaksha controversy, which led to the outbreak of measles. And then in 2022, the avian flu virus, which also affected even the poultry industry, no, in here in Nueva Ecija. And then finally, the MPOX, confirmed MPOX cases, which was also rapidly contained, no, because of the interagency task force protocols. So these are very recent, and I think most of you are already in the medical field when these things have happened. So we are really at risk, no? And we regularly confront epidemic threats. So preparedness is not optional in terms of emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases. So again, as a review, how we monitor again these diseases. We've discussed yung Philippine Integrated Disease Surveillance and Response last week. So this system links Sentinel Health facilities like the hospitals and rural health units to report notifiable diseases. And then in addition, the Research Institute for Tropical Medicine or the RATM, which is it serves as the national reference laboratory. So if you need, for example, confirmation by polymerase chain reaction, whole genome sequencing, and identification of a new microorganism, it goes to RITM. So theoretically, for example, a suspected case of hantavirus enters the country, they will send that specimen to RITM. And then iHomies, which is the electronic health information system that aggregates this data in real time. And the problem here is the accessibility of internet, no, in other areas of the Philippines is still limited. So but it's a very useful tool, no, that is also uh, based, no, from the uh, data that is gathered through surveillance. And then we mentioned the event-based surveillance. So by media monitoring, and then of course yung mga social media or rumor verifications, while you know you have to sift through, no, what is a legitimate or not legitimate outbreaks, no. So even COVID-19, even like in late 2019, there is some post in the social media about COVID-19. It still doesn't have the name COVID-19, um, but there are already that cases, and eventually it spread rapidly and led to the global pandemic. And then critically, we have the FETP, the Field Epidemiology Training Program. So it has trained over 400 field epidemiologists who are deployed to investigate outbreaks across the country. So they are the disease detectives, so to speak. And when something unusual happens, they the FETP goes in, investigate, analyze their findings, and report it, no, to DOH. So there are challenges, no, in terms of the surveillance. Underreporting again would be a problem because of, again, the limited internet connectivity, because this data should be transmitted now electronically through email. Mm. Tell Maybe phone calls are also possible, but it's very difficult if you're talking about giving a large data set, as we mentioned in the previous session, that it's not just the name, age, and sex that is given to the DOH. There are also clinical details that are given in order for the DOH to either confirm the case or give solutions, no, or an actionable plan with regards to these infections. The problem again, since the confirmation is centered on NCR, particularly in RITM, so um, that's very difficult in um, especially if the index case or the suspected case is a from a far away province. So it would really take time for the transportation of the specimen and the analysis, no, of that specimen. So that makes it very difficult, and it leads to a much more delayed diagnosis, no, of a particular disease that that individual might have. Um, and then the typhoon disruptions that would really have, which would lead to difficulty in reporting certain diseases. There is the fragmented data sharing, and then there's a digital divide limiting the real-time reporting. So that is also very difficult, no? Particularly in again in areas with limited internet connectivity. So most infectious diseases, particularly emerging infectious diseases, are zoonotic in origin. So they come from animals. So in the Philippines, again, there are these four specific important zoonotic infectious diseases. So the first one is rabies, in which the dogs are the reservoir. So 99% of these cases come from dog bites. Again, case fatality essentially 100%. But it is entirely preventable with proper wound care, post-exposure prophylaxis, and dog vaccination. The second one is the bird flu, the avian influenza, particularly the H5N1 and the H5N6 strain. The reservoir is the poultry and migratory birds. So it has a pandemic potential. And remember, in 2022, again, the outbreaks in Central Luzon poultry farms, so which led to large-scale culling operations. So sayang yung mga manok na yon, no? That so it led to, of course, the decline, no, of supply of chickens. And then that's very difficult because it affects also the food security of our country. And while no human cases have been documented, hopefully it won't come a time that this virus would lead, no, to a becomes a pathogen that could affect humans and cause an infectious disease. Leptospirosis, okay, yan, yung rodents and livestock are the reservoir. And this is very important, particularly in those flood-prone areas. Based on the average, there's about 4,000 to 8,000 cases per year. So it's very difficult because it can cause complications. It can cause mortality. So leptospirosis is always a problem, no? Especially during the rainy season. And then ito, no, the Nipah virus, while it's not that well known as compared to the other three infections here, it is uh, a something that we must watch out for. Its main reservoir is a Pteropus vampirus, which is a fruit bat that serves as a reservoir for this Nipah virus. And these bats are particularly present in Mindanao and Palawan. In Malaysia and Bangladesh, there are already outbreaks, no, that led to case fatality rates of up to 75%. So the conditions for spillover, since Mindanao, Malaysia, being a fellow Southeast Asian country, there's the possibility of an increase cases, no, of this virus. So therefore, yung surveillance, no, of the animal to human interface matters, and it's very important. So so the key point here is when we don't manage the animal health dimension, it might lead to an exposure of infectious diseases that might create a heavy burden in our health system. So based on the previous lectures, so we have also discussed in partly the epidemiological tools in order to look into the diseases on how to analyze these cases. So we have discussed again yung epidemic curve, So it is a histogram, as you can see here. This is an example. So again, the four types. So you have to remember that. Again, yung a sharp narrow peak suggests a point source. And then yung gradual rise, plateau, and decline is a person-to-person transmission. A continuous flat elevation, it suggests an ongoing exposure. So depending on the trend, no, of the curve, uh, we have an idea on the kind of transmission that infection might have on humans. And then yung basic reproduction number, or the RO, it tells you how many secondary cases one infectious person generates in a fully susceptible population. So for example, I'm primarily infected, and that disease can be transmitted through aerosols. So, and for example, go home. So, and then my family developed uh, the same infection. So they are the so-called the secondary cases. Um, so, for example, no, yung COVID-19 has a delta RO of 5 to 6. Yung measles, much higher, 12 to 18. So the higher the number, it means the spread is much faster, and it could be more dangerous, no, depending on the case fatality rate. So in terms of measles, no, because of its high reproduction number, it's very important to have a high vaccination coverage, no, to control it. The dengue is very low, no, but because of it is dependent on the vector density and the immunity of the population. So that's why sa dengue, it's very important to control yung breeding grounds for mosquitoes. And hopefully, no, uh, the vaccine for dengue would be reintroduced with hopefully with the trust, no, that would be accepted, no, by the public. Attack rate, meanwhile, is the proportion of people who become ill among those who are exposed. So meaning, even if you're exposed in an infected person, that doesn't mean that you will have a clinical manifestation of that disease. So you'll be calculating it yan, using by cases divided by the population at risk. So this is expressed in percentage. That's why you multiply it by 100. So at the barangay level, attack rates help you identify the hotspots. So sa dengue, so it's very important. And then case fatality rate, I mentioned, no, the deaths divided by the confirmed cases. So for example, COVID-19, 1.5%. So meaning for every 200 COVID-19 cases, expect about 3 people that will die. Rabies, again, almost it's essentially 100% if untreated post-exposure. So this time we'll go now to the next part, which is the core idea of One Health approach. So it's very important. This is an important way, no, to detect and to solve certain health scenarios. Because remember, the health of humans, animals, and ecosystems are interconnected. So it is the operational principle of One Health. The diseases we've been discussing, none of them can be solved by the health sector alone. It requires coordinated action across human health, animal health, and environmental systems. So the framework, again, involves the interaction of the human health, animal health, and the ecosystem health. For human health, we're talking about the public health systems, the disease surveillance, the health behavior, nutrition, and yung washing. So again, the relevant agencies here would be Department of Health, the Barangay Health Emergency Response Team, and the local government unit health offices. For animal health, we talk about the livestock and poultry, wildlife surveillance, veterinary services, and antimicrobial use in animals, because animals also are also given antibiotics, no, if they have infections. So the agencies primarily involved here would be the Bureau of Animal Industry, or the BAI, the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources for aquatic animals, and the Department of Environment, Natural Resources, Biodiversity Management Bureau for yung mga wildlife animals. For ecosystem health, so we talk about yung forest and water systems, the climate and the weather, and biodiversity. Again, DNR is involved. The NAMRIA and the Mines and Geosciences Bureau are very important agencies here. So there is an intersection, no, between the human, animals, and the environment, and that is where the One Health operates. So what are the important principles to look into here? So first is this interconnection. You cannot treat these domains as separate. So deforestation affects animal health because you essentially remove their habitat, and these animals sometimes carry infections and reservoir, and that could also be transmitted to humans, which leads to increase in cases of the diseases. So there is the interconnection that you can find, no, if there is a disruption in one of these three. Worst case scenario, there's a disruption in all of these three domains. There is a focus on prevention, so you act upstream. For example, prevent zoonotic spillover before human cases. So again, prevention is better than cure because it's cheaper and less pain, and it has lesser impact in terms of the many aspects, no, versus potential outbreak response. It is multisectoral because again, it's not just the DOH that is involved here. There are other government agencies, and even the private sector are also involved in the participation of this framework. So there is in even the academia community are also involved in this framework as well. Systems thinking, so we address the root cause. So for example, rabies deaths, it it's not just could be due to a vaccine supply problem. This could mean there could be an increase in the number of stray dogs. So you have to manage, no, if there are problem of a high percentage of stray dogs in the community. So you look into all of these aspects. So, and not just looking at a single cause or a single factor that led to an increase in the cases of infections. There's also finally yung equity lens. So looking into the marginalized communities, the informal settlers, the subsistence farmers, the indigenous people, remember, they could bear the highest burden of the zoonotic diseases. So the responses prioritize these groups of people. So there is equity because these individuals are also the people which have lesser access, no, to health interventions as well. So how about in the Philippine context? So again, we have mentioned all of these agencies, DOH being the primarily for the human disease surveillance, and then the epidemic response, and through the National Epidemiologic Center, or the PIDSR. And then yung Bureau of Animal Industries, which this time talks or monitors, no, the animal diseases, avian flu response, and yung quarantine of animals. So for example, no, yung in a poultry, there's an outbreak of cases, so they come in order to contain, no, the chickens, and avoid the transport, no, of these chickens or this poultry outside of that farm, and they're in charge of culling, for example. And then BIFAR, so for the aquatic animal health, uh, which would include yung antimicrobial resistance and fish disease monitoring. Even in red tide cases, for example, that red tide is another zoonotic type of disease, uh, zoonotic disease that could affect humans from time, especially in the Philippine setting from time to time. And then the DNR for the forest cover, wildlife trade, ecosystem health monitoring, which uh, it's a long story. They haven't handled it very well ever since. The Department of Agriculture, because remember, some of these animal reservoirs are also the food sources. So food safety, the antimicrobial use in these animals, and the farm biosecurity, it is the Department of Agriculture that intervenes, no, in these particular aspects. And then finally, the National Reference Laboratory of Research Institute for Tropical Medicine, which also confirmed the outbreaks, no, of certain diseases. So the problem sometimes is that they don't coordinate with each other the way they should. So it's very important in the One Health governance that they have a standing coordination mechanisms before a crisis would happen, and not just be reactive once the outbreak has already been manifested or felt by the public. So in terms of the initiatives, no, of One Health, workshops have started in 2018. So, which produced a ranked list of priority zoonotic diseases. The Philippines have also participated in the Mekong Basin Disease Surveillance Regional Network, so MBDS. There's also commitments that our country made under the Asia-Pacific Strategy for Emerging Diseases and Global Health Security Agenda, or the APSED-3GHSA. And then there's also the creation, no, of the Interagency Task Force on Zoonosis. So not just, so yung IATF is not just primarily for COVID-19. So let's look into a case that is close to Nueva Ecija, which is the avian influenza H5N6 strain. So let's see the concrete actions made by these agencies. So in Nueva Ecija, so there is unusual increase in poultry mortality that was documented. So samples were sent to the RITM, and they confirmed the strain, the H5N6 strain, avian flu, that was detected by PCR and genomic sequencing. So because of that, the Bureau of Animal Industries and the Department of Agriculture led the animal response. So they killed this chicken, approximately 100,000 of them within the 1 kilometer radius of those areas wherein the high mortality rates were noted. But now, because of that, it decreased the supply. But again, there's also yung closure, no, of the poultry markets, no, in these affected municipalities or areas. In terms of human health, the Department of Health, particularly the regional uh, epidemiologic office, um, also look into yung 320 exposed individuals, because there are the poultry workers that could be susceptible, no, in developing also influenza from this exposure to these animals. So there is a prophylaxis given, the oseltamivir, for high risk contacts, and thankfully there are no human cases that were confirmed. And active case finding was also performed, no, by the DOH. For the environment, so the DNR They assess yung wild bird migration routes. They intensified wetland monitoring within the area, and they also perform yung mga dead bird reporting because they are natural reservoir for avian influenza. And then finally the LGU and the Department of Agriculture, once there is a decline of the cases and the mortality, the recovery is very important. So some of the steps they made include yung restocking program. They made biosecurity upgrades on the backyard farms, and they also give livelihood assistance to those affected by the mass culling, no, of the chickens. So thankfully, no human cases were detected because of early detection. And the response was coordinated across all three sectors simultaneously. Again, the animals, the humans, and the environmental domains. If any one of these responses have been delayed or disconnected, the outcome could have been different. And given that at that time, COVID-19 outbreak is still active, it might it might lead to a much more complicated problem in terms of the health infrastructure and care of these patients. Now, another problem would be this one, antimicrobial resistance. It is framed as an epidemic threat. It is a slow-moving multi-sectoral crisis that is accelerating in our country. So if you would see here, no? So, for example, no? So uh, what are some of the reasons why antimicrobial resistance increases in our country? So one of the more common problems is in the human side, no? So certain antibiotics are available even in sari-sari stores. Yung amoxicillin, okay? Even clindamycin. So there are even the stronger types of antibiotics such as the fluoroquinolones that are being sold, no, without the correct prescription from the doctor. And in addition, the problem is it's not a problem if the individual who bought the antibiotics took the medication with the right dose, right frequency, and right duration. The problem is, in addition to self-medication, these courses are started but not completed. So, nakaramdam lang ng konting ginhawa, even if the antibiotic is needed to be taken for 7 days, but because after 2 days of the antibiotic intake, the patient is already asymptomatic, so they won't finish the full course. And this is where the problem begins because this is now a breeding ground for the development of resistant strains. And then, so now the microorganisms develop genes, no, that would uh, lead to the development of antimicrobial resistance. Now, in animals, it could also be a problem because there are prophylactic antibiotics that are routinely used in poultry or in swine farms. No? While it may help prevent infection and promote growth, it could be abused, and therefore resistance also can develop. And then finally, the environment. So, um, remember, like in Manila Bay, and not the one of the not clean. It has various microorganisms there. So the genes now of antimicrobial resistance can also pass through, no, among the organisms that live in these uh, different bodies of water. So they can transfer to other bacterial species. So we're not just talking about Manila Bay. We're talking about other water sources in other parts of the region. No? So it could also affect even the more remote um, bodies of water in our country, which is a source of habitat, which is a source of water, that is drunk also by animals and humans as well. So interaction of these three domains, any factors of this leads to increase in antimicrobial resistance. So let's look at the situation currently. So again, in terms of the OTC sale, 60% sell antibiotics over the counter. But this is uh, a survey a few years back. And then um, in terms of the hospitals, they reported a high prevalence of community-acquired methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. And also, no, they have also detected extended spectrum beta-lactamase producing E. coli, no, in the wastewater. And yung TB, tuberculosis, no, anti-COX medication for tuberculosis is taken for 6 months. So, but again, some individuals doesn't complete the full course. So, and again, because of that, resistance strains develop and multi-drug resistance occurs in individuals. So, in our country, MDR TB cases are count to 19,000 per year, which is relatively high. So, because of this, no, so we have this, uh, the government responded with a national action plan, which involves not just the DOH, but again, the Bureau of Animal Industries, Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Another aspect here would be climate change, which is a health threat. So we are one of the climate vulnerable nations because of typhoons, the increase in sea level per year in our bodies of water, the increase in temperature annually by even more than 1 degree centigrade. So the effects are already here and we feel it. No? This summer, napakainit as compared to the previous years. So let's look into the four health pathways that I mentioned here. So for in terms of the vector-borne diseases, so dengue has been expanding to the higher altitudes, no? Because of the increase in temperature. Malaria has become re-emergent while it was controlled. It has, now the cases are again going up, particularly in Palawan and Mindanao. Because of warmer winters, there is a longer mosquito breeding season, which would also again predispose to um, a potential increase in dengue cases. So it is very difficult, no, for if we don't address these concerns. For waterborne diseases, as I mentioned, the flooding, which leads to the surge in leptospirosis cases, displaced populations face risk of cholera, particularly if they get contaminated water sources. There's also Cryptosporidium and other pathogens, no, that could also affect humans. Food security and nutrition. So because of drought, it could cause crop failure and limited supply of the rice, and it also affects yung not just the nutrition of the children, but of all age strata as well. In terms of fishing, no, yung coral bleaching or yung mga illegal fishing methods reduces fish stocks. High heat stress livestock are more susceptible to infection. And then yung mga stored grain under heat stress develop yung contamination of aflatoxin. So it's very difficult if that environment, no, affects also our food supply. And then finally, yung mental health and displacement. So more than 2 million Filipinos are internally displaced per year because of climate-related disasters, post-disaster the traumatic stress disorders or depression have been documented. So it because of this, no, it led to eco anxiety among the younger generations, and there's also disrupted wash conditions, no, which would increase also the risk of infectious diseases. So those are very important aspects. So now, ganito, this is a group activity. So since you're just, I think, five in a group, so you should meet in a separate time, and you have to perform this activity. So wait. Sorry. Before that, I'm sorry, I skipped this one. So so beyond the framework, so now what are the tools that are the tools that are being used, no, for One Health? So I'm I've enumerated six here. So first one is yung One Health Zoonotic Disease Prioritization, which is developed by the CDC in the US. So as I mentioned, no, the workshop in 2018, this was the initial tool used to rank the priority zoonotic infection. So again, I discussed it earlier, influenza A, rabies, the Nipah, anthrax, and the severe fever with thrombocytopenia syndrome. So it's very important to prioritize so that because um, our resources are very limited. So by prioritizing to this particular infection, so we realize, no, that uh, controlling these infections would be much more cost effective. Joint outbreak investigation, so integrated human, animal, environmental field teams that would look into the outbreaks at the same time. They work as a team. Uh, so they perform simultaneously and not sequentially. And then yung geographic information systems and spatial analysis, which allows us to map disease clusters alongside environmental data. So land use, vector habitat, and water resources. So a particular example here is yung dengue hotspot mapping in LGUs and avian flu risk zoning. Genomic surveillance, so again, yung RITM comes in this point. And they can track how pathogens evolve, identify transmission chains, and detect new variants. So this was critical, especially during the COVID-19 and looking into the newer strains of dengue and influenza as well. Community-based surveillance is important. So yung mga barangay health workers being the frontline individuals because they know their communities and they know a potential increase of cases if it indeed happens. There are also community animal health workers that plays a similar role, but they're looking at the livestock of in the community. There are also participatory rural appraisal for livestock interface, which looks into the farming communities in the provinces. And then finally, the severe acute respiratory infection and influenza-like illness Sentinel Hospital Network. So primarily yan, yung San Lazaro, RITM. So they're the primary networks or hospitals that are involved, no, in primary management if there is indeed either new infectious diseases that have emerged or if there are complicated cases of other infectious diseases as well. So they are very important. They carry important responsibilities, no, in terms of if an outbreak response occurs in our country. So now let's go into the activity. So again, since you're, I think, 5 individuals, so you can just meet as one group, and this is a group activity. So so it's not 30 to 4, so we won't finish it during this session. So meet a common time and discuss one of the four scenarios that I will flash in the next slide. So you choose from the four options, and you would use a WHO situation report template, and you would do an analysis framework. So one, you describe the outbreak. So who is affected? What is the disease? Where and when did it occur? So, and then identify the agents, the pathogen type, transmission routes, reservoir host, and incubation period. And then map the One Health interfaces. So again, what human, animal, environmental factors that are involved, no, in the outbreak. So make a linkage diagram. You perform risk assessment, meaning who is at the highest risk, or is there something that amplifies the transmission of the organism. So you also estimate attack rate if possible. And then what would be the multi-sectoral response? So name three agencies and what would be their roles as a response to that outbreak. And then finally, you would propose prevention strategies using the One Health principles. So while yung multi-sectoral is more of the management, and then ibang part naman yung prevention. So you can pause this part of the video, and you can choose one of these four scenarios. Okay, so each scenario has a real data points embedded. So you use them and then use the One Health framework to structure your analysis. So you would make a one-page written analysis, and then you would make a 3-minute short group presentation. So the group presentation would be on June 10, 8 p.m. So I would evaluate the activity based on these 5 criteria: epidemiologic analysis, the integration of One Health risk assessment, recommendations, and presentation. And then the maximum score would be 4 points in each criteria. So you submit the written report June 9, and then on June 10 we will meet. So since this is week 6, and there are no lectures for this week, because that is the last week. So we will meet at 8 p.m. June 10 for your this will just be a brief uh discussion, no, and output of a particular scenario that your class chose. So summary. So first, diseases don't respect borders. So the emerging infectious diseases emerge at the human-animal environment interfaces. So our country, because of the biodiversity, density, and climate vulnerability, we have a high risk of the emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases. So this is not fear-mongering. It is a reality that we have to face. Data drives response. So that's why the surveillance systems are very important, and even yung field examination and sentinel surveillance. Timely, accurate reporting saves lives because we are able to make data-driven decisions and implement actions that would control these infections. As an example would be the avian flu response in 2022. One Health is not optional. So siloed responses fail. So there should be a proper coordination between all the agencies concerned. So um, one example here is with regards to the antimicrobial response, the avian flu outbreak. So they cannot be addressed if the solutions are not integrated. So it is a must-have quality, no, in terms of carrying out actions, no, in certain health crises. Communities are sentinels. So the barangay health workers, farmers, fishermen, and teachers are the first people to notice when something is wrong. It's not even the health professionals like us, because they're the ones that form part of the community. So the most cost-effective surveillance instrument we can make is to strengthen community-based detection and reporting. And then finally, the time-old adage of the prevention is better than cure. Prevention beats response every time. So upstream investments in ecosystem health, vaccination, biosecurity, and WASH cost a fraction of what it takes to respond to an outbreak. So the political and public health challenge is making that case loudly and persistently. So these are not just academic takeaways. They are calls to action to everyone in this class. So with that, so these are some of the references that you can also use and I use based on this lecture. And thank you for your time. And we'll have a Q&A session later.